Welcome to Just Say This, the place to get all the help you need for the birds and bees talks. I'm your host, Amy Lang. Just a quick reminder, this show is for grown-ups because I'll be swearing. There'll be lots of swears, and then I'll also be talking about grown-up sex. I can guarantee that your kids do not want to listen to this, and they really don't want to listen to it with you. You've been warned. Do you have a question for me? Please give me a call. The phone number is 206-926-1522, 206-926-1522, and I will answer on the show. And if you have a funny sex talk story, please call in those as well, 206-926-1522. Thanks. It's time for your weekly chirp. What's a chirp? It's a script. I'll be picking one topic every other week and give you a script. So are they going to be perfect? Oh my God, no. And if you don't like it or you have a real problem with it and you feel like you need to let me know, please don't be a dick about it. They're not going to be perfect. So you need to tweak the language to suit your family. The next thing is this. Is it going to get the ball rolling? That's the goal. I'm going to give you one little thing to talk to your kids about and you can get at it. If your kids are younger, you're going to dumb the language down, make it simpler. If they're older, you're going to make it more complicated. These are actually directed at 9-year-olds. So enjoy this week's chirp. Hello and welcome to this week's chirp or this month's chirp or a chirp. And today's chirp is about STIs, which is something you absolutely have to talk to your people about because the people who get the most of them are between the ages of 14 and 24. Anyway, got to tell you that. We'll talk about specifics in just a second. What I want to do is talk about how you talk to them about STIs, and then I'm just going to give you the Hot 100. Just kidding. The top 3, you need to talk to them about symptoms because if they don't know the symptoms, they're not going to know if they have one. And honestly, sometimes, not everybody and not a lot of people, when you talk about what goes on down there when it comes to STIs, it can be a little aversion training. Not for most people because pretty much everyone thinks it ain't going to happen to me. So here's my story because surprise, I had some STIs. I still have one, herpes, who's very, very popular. Anyway, so here's one of my funny STI stories. I think it's funny. Anyway, so in my hometown where I grew up in Ashland, Oregon, across the parking lot, literally across the parking lot, was the clinic where everybody went for birth control, STI checks, that whole shebang. And of course I went there. So I was cool getting my birth control there. But here's the deal. The staff, the woman who was at the front desk, I'd known her my entire life. She played bridge with my mom. Yes, that's a thing. She played bridge with my mom. They didn't hang out much, but she totally knew who I was. I knew who she was. And of course, we didn't have HIPAA then, but of course, they were incredibly trustworthy. So here's what's her name. Of course, I can't remember her name because probably blocked it out. So here she is. I come in. So I got something going on down there. And it ended up being something called molluscum, and they look like little, I won't say warts because they're not flat, but these little things that sort of stand up like a skin tag, but they're kind of hard. So I go to see the doctor. His name was D. He was fabulous, and he's looking down there, and he's like, I need to have a second opinion. So D is my doctor, right? I'm down for him. And then who comes in for the second opinion? Dr. Salmons. I've known him my entire life. He knows my parents. He knows my family. So there I am, lying on the table. I was probably 18. And I've got this guy that I've known my entire life looking at my hoo-ha, figuring out what was wrong with me. So that's my funny / humiliating kind of STI story. Anyway, so molluscum is pretty rare. And I wanted to just tell you that just because it's kind of entertaining. And then also, again, you have to talk to your kids about STIs. Some folks still call them STDs. I cannot figure out what the difference is. Once upon a time, I heard that we're saying infection instead of disease because they're not really diseases like most of them are just infections. So here are your top 3 in order of importance, in order of highest infection rates. HPV, human papillomavirus. We used to call that venereal warts. We do not use those words anymore, although describing we do. I'll get there. chlamydia, and gonorrhea. But let's start with how you even just start the conversation about STIs with your kiddos. So they should know what they are, generally speaking, definitely by 4th or 5th grade. Here's what you can say. Hey, sometimes when people have sex, they can have infections in their private parts. These are called sexually transmitted infections or sexually transmitted diseases. And they share germs sometimes when people have sex. There are different kinds of them. We'll talk about them so you'll know how to prevent them, which basically means knowing your partner really well, talking about your sexual histories, and of course, using condoms every time you have sex. They can be really common, but they are preventable. And if you do get an STI, please tell me. You won't be in trouble. I want to make sure you're healthy because sometimes if they go untreated, they can cause really big problems. You may notice that I'm not going to talk about HIV. I'll do that in another CHIRP episode. I just wanted to focus on these very basic STIs and that really simple language for starting the conversation. But let's talk about the most popular and common. First off is HPV, human papillomavirus. So the way this shows up, and oftentimes it doesn't, is that sometimes you can see flat-looking warts, they're called warts, on the penis, on the exterior of the vulva, inside the labia, sometimes around the anus, sometimes around the vaginal area. They can be flat, they can look a little like cauliflower, and also they can be up inside around the cervix, and so you can't see in there. So most of the time when people figure out they have HPV, they have found something like that they can feel or see, some kind of warty thing. You can Google pictures of this, but I do not recommend it because the pictures you'll find are super gross. So don't Google it. So usually, most of the time, people don't know they have it. As you know, the HPV vaccine is really effective. It does not no vaccines cause any kind of bullshit. So it doesn't hurt them to have it. Starts a conversation. They should get it between 11 and 12. And after 28 or so, it doesn't work, or 26 or so, it doesn't work because they probably have had it. So lots of folks have it. They don't know they have it. It goes away. It doesn't necessarily stick around. Some strains of HPV cause cervical cancer. So this is another reason you really need to talk to everybody who is maybe having sex, penis havers and cervix havers, about the possibility of this. So oftentimes no symptoms. Most of the time, a lot of the time, it just resolves on its own. So that's HPV. Next up, we have chlamydia, which I jokingly refer to as the common cold of the crotch. Chlamydia is a bacterial infection. It's treatable with antibiotics. It sometimes has symptoms, sometimes not. Of course, the people who have the vulvas and the vaginas and the tender, more open areas down there get symptoms more frequently than penis havers do. So people with penises, they might have some painful urination. They might have some kind of discharge. People with vaginas may have a variety of things. Painful urination, there might be some blood in their urine. They may have some vaginal discharge that might be yellowish and pretty stinky. They may have stomach and pelvic pain because if chlamydia goes untreated, it can cause all kinds of trouble within the reproductive organs. So that's another one your kids should know about. Just a little side note about that. Some of those things can be symptoms of bacterial vaginosis, which is not an STD. So the smelly, yellowish discharge can be bacterial vaginosis. And then, of course, the painful urination can be a bladder infection. No fun. So as with all the sex talking, it just gets on. There's always something more. Anyway, so that's chlamydia. And the last one is gonorrhea. This STI has symptoms that are very similar to chlamydia. Painful urination, discharge. One of the things that happens to both is bleeding between periods. So I guess the kind of rule of thumb here should be if there is anything funky going on down there, especially, well, with everybody, but in particular with your vagina havers and your vulva havers, they should definitely talk to the doctor, let you know, a trustworthy adult. And I do want to say this. There's no shame in getting an STI, as I know. There's no shame in it. And I think you should be really clear that this is something that happens to a lot of people. It's something that is most of the time is treatable, antibiotics, et cetera, and that if it happens to them, they need to know that they're not alone and that can be part of having a sex life and just really pushing on. It's important to know your partners, to have conversations, to be able to ask about this. And then the last thing is to get tested. Part of a healthy sex life is getting regularly tested for STDs and HIV. This is a lot of STI information, maybe a little TMI at the top, but it's just yet another ongoing conversation to help your kids have really healthy sex life. And so I've got links in the show notes as usual with some information, and there's a really great video from amaze.org about STIs. And they have tons, mostly about everything's connected back to HIV, which I thought was interesting. All right, get out there, have a fun STI talk. And if you think too, let me know how it goes. That's it for this week. Thanks to everyone who's been calling in. The number's 206-926-1522, so please leave me a message if you have a question or a tale from the trenches. And thank you to Melanie Smith, my producer, and to Rolf, who wrote the Birds and Bees and Kids theme song.